Today we have Professor Nick Bostrom here with us. Nick, thank you again for being here. A little bit of background on Professor Bostrom. He's a professor at Oxford University, where he is the founding director of the Future of Humanity Institute. He is the author of over 200 publications, including the New York Times bestseller, Superintelligence. He has been listed on Foreign Policy's Top 100 Global Thinkers list twice. And he is an advisory board member for the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, the Future of Life Institute, and the Foundational Questions Institute. Pretty much anything that has to do with AI in the future, Professor Bostrom is there front and center. So in my mind, Professor Bostrom has brought the idea of superintelligent AI to the forefront of public conversation, including the likes of Bill Gates and Elon Musk, both of which labeled Professor Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, an absolute must-read. And Professor Bostrom, I just want to start by thanking you for everything that you've done. For me personally, I read your book 5 years ago, and it was certainly a foundational element of how I see the world and how I view the future of humanity. And that caused me to go on to launch Futurism, which is now read by millions of people across the world. And so I think I speak for myself, for all living humans, and all future humans when I say thank you for everything that you've done. So the goal of this conversation today is to really have a conversation. We've laid it out into a few different sections, and I'll walk through them with you now briefly. The goal is to start with kind of setting the table on all of the concepts, defining superintelligence, defining where we are relative to this concept, then moving into the kind of obstacles and risks in achieving superintelligence. Finally, moving over to the concept of an existential risk to humanity and where AI fits in that scenario. And finally, evaluating what the future of humanity looks like with superintelligence in the equation. So, Professor Bostrom, let's begin. I think it would be good for all of us to kind of set the table and define this concept of superintelligence.
Yeah, let me just praise you. So you mentioned you had read my book 5 years ago, which is actually 1.5 years before it came out. So this is the sign of a true futurist.
I see the future before it happens. What can I say?
By superintelligence, I just mean any intelligent system that is radically smarter than the best human brains in all practically relevant fields. So not just crunching big numbers or doing some specific task, but scientific and social creativity, social skills, general wisdom. Something that surpasses us across the board.
And we've seen this term artificial general intelligence thrown out quite a bit recently. Is that the same as superintelligence?
Well, you could say superintelligence is a very, very high degree of general intelligence. But you could have artificial general intelligence, but at a slightly lower level. I mean, we humans are non-superintelligent general intelligences. And you could maybe imagine something that was fairly general in its capabilities, but say slower than a human, might then be kind of subhuman general intelligence.
Got it. And in your book, you lay out the various possible paths for humanity to achieve superintelligence. Is that correct?
You could imagine biological engineering pathways to boost the biological human brain with genetic engineering or other things. You could, in principle, conceive of ways of combining technology and biology by implants and different things. I think that path is less promising, but in theory, that is a possible way to get to superintelligence. You could also think of collective intelligences, the way that groups of humans can solve problems that no individual human can. So you could try to achieve superintelligence by making intellectual collaboration much more efficient. But the bulk of the book focuses on machine intelligence as a path to superintelligence.
And you think that is the most probable path towards achieving superintelligence?
Well, I think at least it is the path ultimately that will go the furthest. So the most radical forms of superintelligence, I think, will be machine intelligences. And it is also a strong candidate for what will get us there first. But I wouldn't completely rule out the idea that some form of genetic embryo selection could create some radically enhanced human in a few decades that possibly could get there before we have machine superintelligence.
Got it. And so breaking that down even further, are there various paths for an AI or for us to build an AI that achieves superintelligence?
There are different paths that look kind of interesting and worth pursuing. Nobody knows for sure exactly which one is the shortest path or how you get there. Now, I think one reason to have some confidence that eventually it will be done is we have this existence proof of the human brain. It's a physical system, it produces intelligence, and we can study it and gradually learn more and more about the computational architectures that produce intelligent behavior and then reproduce those in a computer. Now, it might well be that we will get there faster by not hewing too closely to biology. But instead, proceeding with more synthetic algorithms that maybe bear some loose resemblance to the neural networks in the brain, as we've seen recently with the deep learning revolution, but not really caring so much about the details. So I think maybe the best bet currently is something that builds on these advances in deep learning and then does something else on top of that or extends it in some way.
And do you think the moment at which we achieve superintelligence is predictable, or will it kind of be a sudden thing that just happens?
Well, those are two different questions. So,
yes.
One is when it happens, will it be a very sudden thing where you go from maybe something completely unimpressive one day overnight to something that is radically superintelligent? Or will you have a slow, gradual takeoff where maybe it takes years and decades to sort of creep up the human ladder and then kind of go beyond that? I think the more rapid takeoff scenarios are maybe more likely, but we don't know for sure. Now, the other question is, will we be able to see it in advance? And how much of a warning shot will... I think it's fairly... I mean, in some sense, we already see it, or at least some people think they do. Like, this looks like the world is moving to this. Maybe we are still quite far away, but it's like something we can see on the horizon. So I think...
Is there anything that you see right now that leads you to say that could be superintelligent in the future? Are there any entities
not in a particular system right now, but it seems fairly plausible to me, though, that when it happens, it will not be that much clearer that it is about to happen than it is right now. That is, there will have been some impressive recent things, some researchers who are really excited, and then there will be a lot of other people who say, well, maybe in a few decades, and some that say, oh, I've been trying to get this thing to work, and it doesn't work, so it's really hard, and you guys are underestimating the progress. I think by the time it actually happens, that will probably still be the way it is viewed.
And what have you seen that you consider to be impressive?
Well, I've been impressed by the deep learning progress. Just actually, 7 or 8 years ago, starting to get these, say, big vision recognition to really work. Then speech recognition. Then another level of impressiveness is that kind of similar algorithms also started to work on, say, playing Go, that you could have enough visual understanding of a complex strategic problem like that to actually beat human champions. What's impressive, I think, is that kind of the same underlying set of algorithmic building blocks just seem to turn out to work, kind of click into place for many different applications. So it looks like we've solved perception, sensory processing.
Interesting.
And that there is this big research frontier of a lot of interesting ideas that if you sort of survey what is currently possible, there are all these things. Oh, what would happen if we put these two techniques together? Like, would that work? And there's just this huge branching tree of possibilities that researchers are busy exploring.
And so while all of these researchers are busy exploring this and testing all of these hypotheses, is there one or perhaps a few bottlenecks that are slowing progress?
Well, there are always bottlenecks like the amount of talent. So if you had many more really talented AI researchers, I think we would see even faster progress. Now, there is a lot of talent flowing into this field. So a lot of the smartest people who maybe 10 years ago would have gone into theoretical physics, I mean, they wanted to do string theory or like invent the theory of everything. Today, a lot of those same kinds of people maybe now thinking, I want to go into AI. So in a few years' time, they're going to kind of come out on the other side of their PhD program and start contributing to the field. And talent is flowing in from the sides as well. But still, if you had a lot more really top caliber people, it would go faster. Of course, if you had more compute, it would also tend to accelerate progress. And one of the things that has led to this recent speedy advance that we've seen is computers getting faster and computer chips being customized to run machine learning applications. So a lot of this research really requires immense amount of computing power to do it effectively. And the more computing power you do, the more quickly you can cycle through the iterations of your experiments.
Got it. And so you wrote your book, we now know 3.5 years ago, not 5. What has changed in the world since then as it relates to kind of the speed of progress? Has the rate of progress picked up? Has it increased?
Yeah, I think it's been faster. So the book came out about 3.5 years ago. I've had to finish writing it almost a year before that because of the academic publishers move on kind of glacial speeds. So certainly progress has been more rapid over these last few years than was believed it would be at the time. And momentum seems to keep holding up.
Because I know, so Elon Musk about a month ago, and I think we talked about this yesterday, he mentioned at the NIPS conference that he believes that artificial general intelligence is about 7 to 8 years away. Would you agree with this?
Well, it depends a little bit maybe on what you mean by artificial general intelligence. That is, what level of it.
Yes.
So if you define it sufficiently broadly, so you don't really care at all about the speed, but just the generality, then we already have it, and I've had it for a number of years. Jürgen Schmidhuber came up with this algorithm that in principle can solve all solvable problems. Yeah, well, it's going to take longer than the universe to do it, but at least you have a kind of mathematical existence proof of it.
Yeah.
So you have to combine it with some assumption about how fast it is, and then depending on what assumption you plug in, maybe you'll get a different timescale. I mean, most AI researchers would think it'll take longer to get to, say, human-level artificial intelligence. Well,
if you had to put a range, I kind of updated some towards shorter timescales over the last few years. Got it. Very, very interesting. And so we're heading towards artificial superintelligence. We don't know when exactly that's going to happen. We don't know how much notice we're going to have before it happens. But do you think that humanity achieving artificial superintelligence is inevitable? Do you think we will inevitably get there?
Unfortunately, not inevitable. I mean, I think we could destroy ourselves in some way before. We invent some crazy thing in biotechnology that makes bioterrorism too easy.
Assuming no extinction of humanity.
So then it looks likely. I mean, so if you think about how if humanity survives, how could we then possibly fail? So one way would be if we kind of arrange some global totalitarian system that just decided we're not going to go in that direction at all. So that doesn't look at all the way the world is currently structured, right? More researchers are going into this rather than fewer. So the only other way we could fail, it seems, is if it were so enormously difficult that it was just forever out of reach of human minds to construct it.
But you don't think that's the case?
I don't think that's true either. So then it looks like we'll continue to move in this direction, and the goal is some finite distance away. So some uncertainty as to how long it will take to get there, but assuming we just continue walking, we will eventually get there.
So assuming we don't kill ourselves, or there is no asteroid that comes and eliminates humanity, we will ultimately achieve artificial superintelligence. Looks promising. Looks very promising. Yeah. Okay, let's shift to kind of the next segment, which is, now that we have this assumption, we will get there inevitably. How do we optimize the outcome of artificial superintelligence? And you have a great quote that I was actually, I stumbled upon this morning. You said, "Before the prospect of an intelligence explosion, we humans are like small children playing with a bomb." And so, I also read your paper on the varying levels of openness in AI development, and there's a tremendous amount of interesting insights in there. But you also broke down this problem of optimizing the outcome of superintelligence into two distinct problems. You have the control problem, which is effectively how do we design AI systems such that they will always do what their designers, which is us, intend. And then you have the political problem, which is how do we achieve a situation in which individuals or institutions empowered by such AI use it in ways to promote the common good. And so essentially, how do we build an AI that we can maintain control of, and how do we make sure that the people that have control of that AI are using it for the common good? And let's start with the control problem, because I think they're quite distinct. What steps do you think that we, humanity, are currently taking in resolving this control problem or mitigating it to the degree that we can?
So we are currently doing some research on it, more than we were doing just a few years back. I think we could still be doing more, but there are a number of research groups in different places that are doing foundational work on this alignment problem or control problem, so that if you figured out one day how to make a machine super intelligent, how could you then ensure that this thing that is much smarter than you will still do what you intended for it to do? Mm-hmm. And so my group is doing regular technical research seminars with DeepMind on this. There's like a group at Berkeley. There's like a group in Montreal there. So that's one thing we're doing, which is helpful.
Are there any global bodies that are thinking about this problem?
Not really, but it's also not clear what you would hope that they would contribute by thinking about it right now, other than there could be more funding for this research. Yeah. So, because I think that's the main thing we can do now. Yeah. Like down the road, there might be some additional things. And this is a connection between the control problem and this governance problem. If you're thinking about some scenario in the future where we're getting closer to developing this, and there are many entities developing it, and each want to be first. If you have a highly competitive dynamic, it might be difficult for the frontrunner, even if they are very responsible and want to be very careful, to slow down and put all these safety mechanisms in place if there are 10 other competitors that are like just a few weeks behind. Like how much time do you have? So there might be some possible scenarios in the future where having a more globally coordinated approach would be helpful as well.
I believe yesterday Stuart Russell was on the stage, and he brought up the example of you have an intelligent AI that's in a robot at home, and you ask your home robot to cook you dinner, and you have no food at all. And so the robot ultimately sees your cat, kind of puts one and one together, decides to cook your cat for you to eat. And so obviously I don't think anybody wants to eat their cat. But how do we and can we teach an AI human values and this concept of human morality? Is it possible?
Yeah. I mean, I think in principle, this is a solvable problem. I think what makes it so that it would be wise to spend a lot of effort on it in advance is that once the problem comes to the fore, we might only get one shot at getting it right. Like, we might have to get it right on the first attempt. Like, you don't want to have some underlying superintelligence running around working at cross purpose to you, right? So since this is going to be a complex system, since it's going to have to operate in a very different context than the one we can test it in. So we can test it in the laboratory when it's kind of boxed in and maybe not fully super intelligent, but then eventually it should be safe even when it has potentially unlimited power. There is this question whether our abilities to test it will find all possible errors and flaws in our implementation. So,
yes.
But yeah, I think it is a solvable problem in principle.
Solvable problem.
And probably it will involve using the AI's own intelligence, its learning capability, to enable it to get a progressively better understanding of human values.
Got it. And so this is the World Government Summit. We obviously have the political problem. And we know, we've seen firsthand, the UAE has appointed the world's first Minister of Artificial Intelligence, His Excellency Omar, who I don't know if he's here. But what do you see the government's role being in addressing this problem?
Well, so I think it's important to distinguish two different contexts. So there's the longer-term context, which I guess we've mostly been talking about so far.
Yes.
When AI truly succeeds, you have superintelligence. And then a more near-term context, where we're talking about applications of current or near-future technologies. So in the near-term context, I think there is a range of different things where governments now can play a helpful role. So say in applying machine learning in healthcare. A big consideration is concerns about patient confidentiality. But on the other hand, you need these data sets to be available to the AI algorithms and to researchers in order to develop these applications. So there needs to be some kind of agreement forged between the holders of healthcare data and AI researchers and companies that want to create products to use that. So maybe governments can play a facilitating role. Similarly, when you have self-driving cars ready to go on the road, there will have to be some kind of regulatory framework to decide which cars are safe enough, what happens when they crash. So I think there's a bunch of things there. When it comes to these longer-term issues, I think it's still too early, really, for governments to get involved in a big way. I think there are basic things they can do, like fund research and build up more understanding. But there isn't a particular regulatory action, let us say, that I think it would be helpful right now for governments to take with reference to this hypothetical future situation. I think we first need to develop a better understanding of that hypothetical future context.
Because I believe you coined a term, differential technological development. You did, correct? And this principle states that we ought to retard the development of dangerous technologies, particularly ones that raise the level of existential risk and accelerate the development of beneficial technologies. So you don't think that the government's role should be to slow down or kind of limit the rate at which AI development is progressing?
No, I don't think so, at least not as the strategic situation is today, no.
Got it.
I mean, because, well, there are a couple of reasons why, but one is that AI, although the book focuses a lot on these negative scenarios, is also potentially the solution to a lot of vulnerability that we humans face from other technological areas and outside technology as well. So superintelligence is not just a source of existential risk. It is also the solution to a lot of other existential risks. So that's one. Another reason for why I think I would not recommend slowing it down is that I can't see practically how that would actually help.
Yeah.
Given it wouldn't result in a real slowdown, since there are so many different sites of development, and it would just make it harder, I think, to have an open conversation about it.
And you introduced the concept of an existential risk, is that correct? And you define it as one in which an adverse outcome would either annihilate human originating intelligent life or permanently and drastically curtail its potential. And so kind of moving into the ethical and moral questions that this raises, we know that there have been about 108 billion people that have lived on this planet to date. But if humanity lasts another 50 million years, and current trends hold, the total number of humans who will ever live is more like 3 quadrillion. Humans living during or before 2017 would make up only 0.0036% of all humans ever. So that kind of raises the question of when you're thinking about regulating or controlling superintelligence in such a way to make sure that it doesn't eliminate all of humanity, what are you optimizing for? And who? Who are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for us here in our lives, or future lives and future humans to make sure that they will live?
I think we could have both of those components in our utility function, like place some weight on each. But this fact that you referred to, that if we survive with this critical century, and if this future really lies ahead of us, we could live for millions of years, and maybe even colonize the universe, in which case those numbers could become far greater.
Yeah.
That is a very peculiar fact that just is kind of weird if you think about it, because if there is this immense future ahead, and we actually have some real chance of realizing it, then that would imply that we are extraordinarily early, in the sequence of all humans that will ever have lived. And that is kind of strange. Like, why should we be among the very, first of 1 percentage point of all of them? Like, that's a very unusual position to be. Like,
it's
almost
unusual.
everybody would be later.
Do you think that it should be taken more, though? Because we see right now not all, but the overwhelming majority of resources being allocated towards addressing current problems. And we don't particularly see enough resources being put towards addressing future problems that could impact billions, if not trillions or quadrillions of humans.
Well, I think there could be more, yes, done on behalf of the future, and various reasons why there isn't. So most people don't really care that much about the far future. Also, it's a kind of global public good. To the extent that we care about the far future, we think, maybe somebody else could fund that or work on that. So in standard economics, there is this expectation that public goods are underprovided by the market, right? Because a private investor will only capture a small fraction of the benefits. Now, if you have a global public good, that problem is even worse, because each actor is a smaller part of the whole. In this case, it's a kind of transgenerational global good. So the situation would expect it to be even worse. And out of these enormous benefits that could come from reducing existential risk by a small fraction, the part of that falls to the person or the country that does it now is negligible compared to the overall benefits. So you'd expect selfish reasons to not sufficiently provide for these goods. So it's not that surprising that we're not doing more.
Do you think that superintelligence presents the greatest existential risk to humanity?
Perhaps, or maybe, yeah. Biotech would be another contender. Now, it depends a little on how you carve them up. So suppose you, instead of basing it on technology areas, you say there's one set of risks that come from conflict or deliberate destructive actions, which could then use different technologies to do the destruction. I think that conflict risk would maybe be the biggest if you carve it up like that.
Interesting. So it seems like we should certainly be doing everything that we can to prevent superintelligence from killing all of humanity. But we're not at the same time, right? You said it's weird. We're not allocating
there are a
enough.
lot of things that we should be doing that we're not doing.
What do you
so
think that we should? What do you think that we should be doing that we're not doing?
In general?
No, related to this topic.
Well, so within the kind of envelope of plausible alternative world, like so a very different civilization on some very different planet that had its act together, that would be a whole different story, where maybe they would take thousands of years to make sure they really got it right. They would put their deceased people in chronic suspension in the meanwhile, so nobody died whilst they were patiently preparing for this great moment, and then they would do a slow, coordinated takeoff to superintelligence that would be aligned with their whole civilization's values, and everybody would live happily ever after. That's kind of a distant counterfactual. So in the world as it is, I think the things on the margin that would be helpful would be to entice more top talents to go and work on this alignment problem and make sure they are properly funded, to start to inculcate among all relevant AI actors this norm that AI, if it one day is developed, should be for the common good of all of humanity. It's too big to be exclusively owned by one corporation or even one nation. We're all in this together.
So AI should be considered a common good.
Sorry?
It should be considered a common good.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that superintelligence should be primarily for the common good. It doesn't mean that there can't be profit motives on the way to developing AI applications. That's perfectly consistent. But if one day somebody hit the jackpot and kind of this like eternal money machine just poured out gold, then there would be enough of that to make sure that everybody would have their needs taken care of, and then some.
Let's assume that we fast forward 50 years into the future. We have created artificial superintelligence. It is here. Can you paint a vision of that future for us? What does the optimal outcome in 50 years, assuming we hit superintelligence, look like to you?
Well, it's actually somewhat tricky to have a detailed view about what a utopian society would look like. And so to the extent that people have tried to write about utopias, they have largely failed. If you look through literature, like there's no real detailed utopia that you would really want to live in. Like it kind of would be maybe an interesting place to visit for a couple of weeks, but I don't think we have a very concrete view about if things went well, exactly how they would. I'm actually working on a paper on that question, so maybe there will be some more I could say about that once that is finished. I mean, you can. Part of the equation is easy to see. So there's all kinds of negatives that we could get rid of, that are obvious, sort of like child dying from leukemia. Like it'd be better if it didn't, right? Some family in Africa who can't have enough to eat, so they have nutritional deficiency. Like better if they had enough to eat. And so there are all these kinds of specific problems that you could get rid of. So that's step one, and that would be wonderful already. But I think though that beyond that, there's this enormous upside of positive things you could do.
Yeah.
I just think it's harder to vividly imagine in detail what that would look like in advance.
So let's, going back to this world 50 years from now, we've built this superintelligence. Could you fathom a reason why that superintelligence might want to simulate environments that could be perhaps as realistic as this environment here?
Yeah, I mean, you could think of different possible reasons for that.
And we know that you coined the term the simulation argument, which presents a trilemma. Do you want to outline what that states?
Yeah, so the simulation argument is an argument that tries to show one of three things is true, although it doesn't tell us which one. So one possibility is that almost all civilizations at our current stage of technological development go extinct before they reach technological maturity. So that's a kind of a pessimistic hypothesis, right?
Stark.
So the second possibility is that out of all civilizations that do reach technological maturity, there is strong convergence in that they all completely lose interest in using some of their planetary-sized supercomputers to create simulations of alternative worlds or alternative histories or simulations of their forebears. They all just decide not to do that. And the third possibility is that we are literally living in a computer simulation created by some technologically mature civilization. So the argument shows that one of those is true, at least one of them. Yeah, I mean.
And we've seen some big names come out recently. Elon Musk, I think he said that there's a 1 in billions chance that we are not already living in a simulation. He seems quite confident. You know, we've seen, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson came out with some level of confidence on this topic. What do you think? Do you agree with Elon Musk? Does he know something that we don't know? Has he broken the simulation?
He probably knows a lot of things that we. No, I mean, I think that 1 in a billion, that would be an underestimate, I think, of the probability that we are not.
Yeah. What?
I tend to punt on the exact probability. I will go out on a limb and think, I think it's more than a 1 in a billion chance that we're not in a computer simulation.
More than a 1 in a billion, but you won't give a specific number. I can quote you on that.
Well, okay. No, I won't give a specific number. But I mean, but then again, like everything that human believes has like more than a 1 in a billion chance of being wrong, right? Because we are just not such accurate systems that can guess about a billion different things and get a billion things right. Like,
yeah, because I believe last year at the Isaac Asimov Memorial Debates, the topic was this exact topic: are we living in a computer simulation? And they posited various ways that we could test or validate this hypothesis. Is there some way that we can validate this hypothesis? Will we ever know whether we're living in a simulation? Can we break out?
So there are possible observations that would tell for or against the hypothesis. I mean, take the limited case where like a window pops up in front of you saying you're in a simulation. Click here for more information. It would be conclusive evidence. Yeah. So similarly, the absence of such a window is evidence against the simulation hypothesis, weak evidence, but perhaps more plausibly, if you remember that the simulation argument had this disjunction, these 3 alternatives, and it said at least one of them is true. So that means evidence for or against the other 2 hypotheses will indirectly also affect the probability of the simulation hypothesis. So any evidence that makes it either more likely or less likely that we will eventually survive to reach technological maturity will impact the simulation argument, or any evidence that makes it more or less likely that there will be this strong convergence among technologically mature civilizations.
So if we continue conducting complex simulations, and if we build a superintelligence, which seems to be quite inevitable, there's a higher probability, therefore, that we are living currently in a simulation.
Well, that's right. So the closer we move to ourselves, creating ancestor simulations, building these, like the more clear it is that the 2 alternatives to the simulation hypothesis are false. Like, so if we ourselves one day reach technological maturity, then clearly that shows it's not the case that almost all civilizations at our current stage fail to do it, like if we made it through. Yeah. So, and if we're still interested at that point in creating these, then that kind of rules out the second alternative as well. It's not the case then that virtually all technologically mature civilization lose interest in this when we become a technologically mature civilization with it. So that if we build this giant planetary-sized computer and set it all up, and we're about to switch on the computer to run all these simulations, then at that point it would be pretty clear that we ourselves would be in a simulation.
And if we found out with 100% certainty that we were living in a simulation, how do you think that should or would impact the way that we live our lives?
Well, the should is a very difficult question because a lot would depend on the nature of this hypothetical simulation, the motives of the people who built it, the way it's constructed. And that's something we don't understand very well. So absent some additional assumption about that, it would be hard to derive very concrete practical consequences from it. Now, it is true, though, that kind of new possibilities come onto the table, conditional on you being in a simulation, that would not seem to exist if we are living in basement-level physics. So a simulation, if somebody turns off the power supply, like the simulated world just pops out of existence. Right? Whereas if in basement level physics, the world we think can't suddenly just disappear. Like there are conservation laws in physics, so that would be one possibility that exists. And other things as well. You could imagine afterlives. You could imagine all kinds of other interventions that kind of seem perfectly like realistic if we are in a simulation, but that would kind of seem outside the standard model of physics if we're in basement reality.
So if we were living in a simulation, there'd be a new existential risk of unplugging the cord.
There might also be different kinds of existential hope.
Thank you. This was a great conversation. So I think we have 6 minutes left. If anybody has any questions for Nick. Yes, in the middle. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Urban. I work here for the Dubai government, and we're always interested in these things very much.
There you go.
So my question would be like, let's say we reach a state of super intelligence one time. Probably it's a moving target anyway. The more we know, the more complicated could this be defined. But what would be the next big thing basically after that a human will probably start to work on? And I think that now that advances in this area are getting more and more concrete and results are actually coming out more and more, I think there could be something like something next. But what would you see this to be maybe?
So after we build superintelligence, what would be the next big thing humans will start to work on then? Improving your golf game? So, I mean, it is the last invention we will ever need to make. If you think about what it means to surpass humans in all cognitive domains, that includes, as a special case, the domain of inventing new technologies. So from that point on, further scientific and technological advances would then be more efficiently driven by these machine brains.
Would you say it's like a gorilla trying to think about what humans should be focused on or should be pursuing? Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit. And, you know, he might get some things right. I mean, we still eat some bananas every once in a while, so it's better than random chance if he gets. No, I mean, it's a little bit better. So if you think there's some chance that we actually succeed with the alignment problem, then what would happen after superintelligence would be kind of what is best for us, what we really want. So to the extent that you think you have some idea of what you really want, what would be best for you, that indirectly then would be a prediction of what the future would look like. So we have some rough ideas of that. And so there is then at least some probability kind of peaked around that optimum for realizing human values. And then there is some probability on other outcomes as well that might just be kind of boring and interesting by our lights because neither we nor any other sort of morally relevant mind exists in them. But one consequence of superintelligence, I believe, would be the onset rapidly thereafter of technological maturity. That is, if you think there is a kind of physically close to optimal technology of different kinds, it might be that once further development happens at 1,000x, 1,000,000x, what they happen now, then we will get close to those ultimate limits within a short period of time, maybe within a year or something like that. And so that the arrival of superintelligence is then not just a big advance in AI, but it's kind of in all technological, all scientific, all economic areas, a kind of jump forward to something close to the final state.
It is really
you get a kind of telescoping of the future where things that the human species could have achieved in the fullness of time if we had 40,000 years to work on it. Maybe we would have cures for aging and uploading into computers and space colonies and all of these things that are consistent with the laws of physics, but just going to take a long time for us to do, right? Maybe all of those are feasible shortly after you have superintelligence working on it.
Would you say that it is very much kind of the last critical invention that we need to make?
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
So I wonder what you think the division of labor should be in thinking about these issues, because I'm from the computer science department at Oxford, and it's probably fair to say that most of the staff at the department think that worrying about these issues is a bit of a distraction. They just want to get on with their work on databases and so on. Do you think that's fine, because then we can just leave that to philosophers and so on to think about, or do you think that we should sort of make it into so that, do you think the computer scientists of tomorrow should be educated in thinking about these issues and sort of build it into the people that work on these issues, or what do you think of that division of labor?
No, I certainly don't think we should leave it all to philosophers, but I mean, I think that the main work needs to be done by a computer scientist, or people who go into that from some neighboring field, whether it's mathematics or physics. And so we have a research group working, in fact, with some of the other people from, I think, Oxford from engineering and some people from computer science, and have a technical work done within us. And I think that's, for the alignment problem, is what you need, technical work to solve a technical problem. I think that there is still room for more conceptual work in this field as well. So it's important to have some people who are not just good at manipulating formulae, but to have a kind of deeper intuition about what the problem is and new ways of solving it. But I do believe in the principle of division of labor, though, so I don't think that everybody should just rush in and spend 1 hour a week trying to solve this problem. It's better to have some people doing this on a professional basis as their full-time job, and then have other people just take care of all the other things that still need to be done in the world.
See if we can do one more question. Yes, I believe you had one.
Thank you very much. We really enjoyed your talk, and I believe that you take us from superintelligent to philosophy, then going to wisdom and common sense and respecting the human value. So I'm just finding a kind of contradicting to philosophy. Because if we are moving to superintelligence, so that means that we are trying to make things perfect enough and to eliminate errors. And almost to come up with a zero mistake, which is, there is nothing called zero. But at the same time, we are trying to mimic or feed that brain machine to learn about the cognitive behavior and to predict and to perceive like a human. And humans also tend to do mistakes based on their perceptions and based on the cognitive behavior that it comes from knowledge and experience. So how come you can bridge between these two acts, between trying to be super intelligent, trying to eliminate errors, making a better outcome, but at the same time still having a learning experience from the mistake that a human tend to have? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not sure I 100% understood the question, but what it sounded to me like you were asking was, we humans are fallible and
yes.
make errors. So even if you had an AI that perfectly could learn to mimic our behavior, like maybe that's still not good enough. Like we'd ideally want something that can avoid doing the errors we would make. And so this is something you can find occurring in different ways when you're trying to use machine learning to replicate human behavior. So on the one hand, you could try to train a model just to behave in the same way as, say, a human reference agent would. A different thing you can try to do is to try to have an AI that tries to figure out what it is that the human was trying to do, and then do that. So you try to build a model of the human's preference functions, realizing that the human will not always be acting optimally according to his or her preference functions sometimes make mistake, but you can kind of see what it is they're trying to do, and then potentially do a better job of that. So if I were to reach out and then maybe pour over my coffee, you might kind of see that what I was really trying to do was grab my coffee, not pour it out. So when trying to create these models where in inverse reinforcement learning, you try to infer what the preference function is from some agent by observing its behavior, you need to have a rich enough model class that it includes these possibilities that the agent is making mistakes, that the agent is biased. And then potentially you can do better than that. But you need to kind of extract the values from us, and then you can optimize for those rather than just kind of, it's like there's a saying like, do what I say, not what I do. But here it's kind of do what I want, not what I say, nor what I do. Because both what we say and what we do is merely imperfect reflections of what we really want. So one line of attack on this problem is to kind of try to extract these deeper values that underlie a lot of our specific behaviors and judgments. Now, that then has various problems. Like if you extract some values and they're not exactly what we really wanted, then you have this thing that goes out optimizing the world according to this template that didn't really match our deepest value. So you might go a different approach and saying, instead, let's not do that. Let's not have a system that goes out optimizing the world according to some utility function at all, but something that just takes one step at a time, trying to guess which of the possible actions that it could take that we would most approve of. And then it just takes that action, but in a myopic way that doesn't look ahead. And then it can come back and do that again. And then you might have a system that would more closely replicate our errors as well. But it's an open question where the likelihood of a catastrophic error is the greatest. Yeah. Like if you try to go to the deepest values, where if you get it right, it would really be good, and it would avoid making any errors and mistakes that we do. That would be wonderful. But if you get it wrong, you might get this future kind of formatted according to this slightly warped conception of human values. Or if you try to do something more that is just a behavioral emulator, where you do capture sort of the warts and flaws of humans, but arguably the risk of a truly irreversible catastrophic error is reduced.
Professor Bostrom, thank you for this, and thank you all for joining for this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it.